Today we have Muppet Vision 3D, thanks to Jim Henson in a partnership with the Walt Disney Company. But it could have, should have, and probably would have been a lot more had it not been for the untimely death of Jim Henson. So instead, what we're left with is just this one attraction and the Muppet courtyard around it. But really, this is the only thing that exists for the Muppets. Now, it appears as though the Muppet Courtyard and Muppet Vision 3D has run its course and Disney is going to retheme it. So I'd like to take you on a little tour of what the Muppets meant to Disney and how they came to be here in the Hollywood studios and kind of where we kind of left off. There's some interesting history here that I think is worth noting because I think the Muppets are going to sort of disappear from some portion of what we know about Walt Disney World. This is the story of how the Muppets came to be a Walt Disney property. And to truly understand and appreciate this story, we have to go back in history to look at Jim Henson's life. Jim Henson was a creative person. When he was in college, he started playing around with the idea of puppets and realized that puppets themselves weren't that interesting. They were stiff, they were made of wood, they weren't very articulate. And he realized that he could make something that was a little more interactive and have some fun with it. So he started playing around with foam and felt and other materials and came up with much more articulate puppets, things that could really be expressive and could move. He could have arms on them, and those arms could be connected via a stick, and that stick could then move a little bit, and they could do things that you typically wouldn't expect from a puppet. It was really kind of an interesting time for him as he was trying something creative and new. And now, when he decided on something that was a little more articulate, that could really move, he decided that the name marionette puppet really worked because a marionette is a fairly articulated thing that can move around a lot. And a puppet is really just something that sits on your hand and moves its mouth. So he merged the two words together and called them Muppets. And so the name was born and he had an idea. Shortly after college, he started playing around with some more ideas and sold his ideas to different companies and wound up doing some commercials and some other clever and creative things along the way. And he started his Muppet company, his Muppet Labs, if you will. And his first hire was a guy by the name of Frank Oz. Now, you're probably familiar with Frank Oz. Frank Oz has gone on to do other things, including voicing Yoda in the Star Wars series. Kind of an interesting connection there back to Jim Henson and the circular part about being at the Walt Disney Company. In the late 1960s, public broadcasting was looking to expand its children's programming, to do more things and be more educational to a large degree. And they worked with a company called the Children's Television Workshop to start to come up with an idea for some programming that would really fit that need. Sesame Street was going to be this interactive type of environment where they could teach the alphabet, teach about counting, have a little fun with it, and get kids engaged in some way. The Children's Television Workshop wanted to make it fun. It was about this educational thing, but in the truest Walt Disney sort of sense, it was more about edutainment to a large degree. Educate, enlighten, but entertain at the same time. They had heard about Jim Henson along the way and reached out to him to ask him if he could create some short segments that would work within the confines of the idea of Sesame Street, to have these Muppet characters appear and be fun and interactive for the kids, because it would be much more educational and entertaining if it wasn't just live actors on the stage, but you had these interspersed little segments with Muppets. So the original incarnation called for these Muppets to have their own segments that were separated out from the live action, but they would still teach about very specific things and talk about letters and counting and things like that. It was hugely and wildly successful, much more than I think anyone anticipated. And so the idea for Sesame Street was born. You had Bert and Ernie, Oscar the Grouch, Grover, and many other characters. But the one that stands out as the most interesting and the most complex character was Big Bird. The Children's Television Workshop figured out that it was better to have the characters not just in these independent segments, but to merge them in and have them appear with live actors on the set. And so the concept for the Muppets really took off from that point. It was really interesting, it did something really unique, and it really showed Jim Henson's sort of panache, his ability to create something imaginative and do something different. So for the next 10 to 15 years, you had Jim Henson and his team doing the Muppets on Sesame Street. Every so often, Kermit the Frog, who was a Jim Henson creation, who really was Jim Henson, would appear in Sesame Street as well. You could make the case that Jim Henson really wasn't satisfied with what he was doing at that point. He truly wanted to do more. There were a lot of things he was doing at that point that were really creative ventures. And then, of course, he started The Muppet Show, which was sort of a nod to the idea of a variety show.
It's The Muppet Show with our very special guest star, Shirley Bassey. Yeah!
Much like you would have seen in like Ed Sullivan in the 1960s, where Kermit the Frog would be hosting, and there would be misadventures that happened along the way. It was really a lot of fun for that period of time when The Muppet Show was ongoing and doing some really fun things. And then in the early 1980s, he had The Muppet Movie, and a couple of follow-on movies from there as well. He really had developed the Muppets into something that people wanted to see, that people were interested in. And he was pushing the envelope, like watching Kermit the Frog ride a bicycle. One of those really interesting things that really went in a whole new direction and really showed a creative spirit. And don't sleep on the fact that Waldorf and Statler were there. They were supposed to be the old guard, the people who were making fun of everything, that wanted things to be like they were in the past. It really was kind of fun. And then, of course, he had Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem Band. They were supposed to be a look at counterculture. Jim Henson was not about counterculture, but he wanted to make them appear there so he could bring it in as part of everything he was doing. And this is where the Walt Disney Company comes in. They had taken notice of Jim Henson and his creative spirit. In the latter part of the 1980s, Michael Eisner had reached out to Jim Henson and talked to him about doing some work for the Disney Company. Now, the story that's told by the media is that Disney wanted to get the Muppets and bring the Muppets into the Walt Disney Company. But the reality is just a little bit different than that. The Disney Company really wanted Jim Henson. They wanted his creative spirit. At that point in time, in the late 1980s, Michael Eisner and Disney were working on this idea to bring together all the best and the brightest creative people and make them essentially Imagineers, or some sort of creative types in the Imagineering group, to create the best content they could for the Walt Disney Company. They had put the press on for a lot of different people that they had met over the years who were very creative. Some were on a contract basis, some they wanted to bring on full-time. Jim Henson was one of the people that they wanted to bring on full-time to work for the Walt Disney Company and really use his creative talent to create more content for the theme parks, for movies, for other things that Disney had in mind. Michael Eisner was kind of a genius that way when it comes to thinking about how to move the company forward. And so negotiations were ongoing for a period of time. But sadly, Jim Henson passed away at the age of 53 in 1990, and the deal fell apart. Frank Oz tells a story that the relationship with Disney is really the reason that Jim Henson passed away. He thought that this deal with Disney had a lot to do with Henson's health, and it led to, ultimately, his death. Now, I did note that the Disney Company really wanted Jim Henson. They liked the Muppets, they wanted the Muppets, but they weren't going after the Muppets. They wanted Henson and his creative abilities. So after Henson died, they started to pull back on the offer. They told his wife and children, you know, we really like the Muppets and we'd be happy to buy them from you, but for a much lower asking price than what we were going to give you when Jim Henson was included as well. The family saw that as kind of an insult and didn't take kindly to it. So instead, they turned around and sold the Muppets to a German television company who promised that they were going to create something unique with the Muppets and really keep the brand alive. Now, Sesame Street was never included in any of these discussions. Jim Henson had set aside the entirety of the Sesame Street community and sold the rights to it to the Children's Television Workshop so that they could own it themselves and continue to use it and produce new content with it. So they had already been moved away from the Jim Henson Company. As I understand it, he still had some relationship in terms of the creative part of it. So Bert and Ernie and Grover, Oscar and Big Bird and others were all part of this Children's Television Workshop and not part of the Muppet deal, even though all of the characters had been created around the same time. Disney had planned a big splash with the Muppets. They really wanted the Muppets to become a property that was really part of everything they were doing. Before 1990, they were going through a number of ideas on how they could leverage the Muppets. There was a TV special they did in May of 1990 where they showed the Muppets at Walt Disney World. They were in Epcot, they were in the Magic Kingdom, they were in the studios. It was an interesting and kind of fun thing they did to really show you how the Muppets were going to be integrated into Walt Disney World. And in fact, one of the other things that happened was that after Disneyland's 35th anniversary, the Muppets were going to take over Disneyland. They were going to run Disneyland for a year while Mickey and Minnie and the rest went on vacation. It was a whole thing they had in mind to really build this idea of the Muppets being a part of the Disney franchise. Of course, that never happened. For a lot of reasons, not the least of which was Henson's death, this didn't come together. Now, for a year or so before Jim Henson's death, the Disney company had started planning up an idea for it, an interactive sort of show where the Muppets would be on stage and talking to the guests who were at the Disney MGM studios. Before it became the Under the Sea stage show with The Little Mermaid, the theater that's there on the corner of the animation courtyard was used to have a Muppet show. It was a live show with people inside of full Muppet costumes doing some funny things and kind of introducing the Muppets to the Disney MGM studios and the guests that were in attendance. It was a fun little show. They did some funny things. They talked to Mickey Mouse, and there was a monorail that crashed into the building. It was kind of fun, and I remember seeing it, and it was a good time. When the deal fell apart to have the Muppets, things got a little complicated. They had an agreement to allow that show to continue for another about year or so, and they had some sort of an agreement in principle. They were going to start the Muppet Vision 3D show shortly after that. They'd already filmed it, they'd already built most of the theater for it, and at some point they were going to open it up and have it open to guests. So they had to negotiate with the Henson family and this German company that had bought the Muppets to make sure they had the licensing rights to continue to make the Muppet Vision 3D show.
Modern high-tech facility, we have perfected Muppet Vision 3D, a new film process which we're about to demonstrate to you. Now, working the projector is an old friend of ours, the Swedish chef. Chef, everything okay?
Their machine is going to flamey fluty.
Exactly. And our demonstration includes a little song from Miss Piggy. Little? Did I say little? I meant to say it's a huge show-stopping major song from Miss Piggy.
That's more like it.
Good. And we've also got a big musical finale from Sam Eagle. Sam, what's it about?
It's called A Salute to All Nations, but mostly America.
Great. So it's going to be a swell demonstration, and at no time will we be stooping to any cheap 3D tricks.
Did you say cheap 3D tricks?
Now, as you may be aware, the German company that had bought the Muppets didn't do much with them. It didn't turn out the way they wanted it to. In fact, they couldn't really figure out how to create something with the Muppets and really produce it in a way that they could distribute it and make it meaningful. So a little over a year after they'd purchased the Muppets from the Henson family, they sold the Muppets in their entirety back to the Henson family. Unfortunately, the German company lost their shirt on the deal. They wound up selling it back at a much lower discount price than originally they had intended to. But it came back to the Henson family. The Henson family tried very hard to make it work and build something out of the Muppets, but it didn't work for them either, without Jim Henson to kind of guide them, even though they had some bright and creative people working for them. A lot of the people that worked for Henson were really smart and had some very creative ideas. Jim Henson's wife was very good at it too, and his kids as well, but they couldn't pull it together, and it didn't work out for them. So a couple of years later, the Walt Disney Company came back around and said, hey, we'd like to buy the Muppets. And this time, it seems as though they made a reasonable offer, so the Henson family sold it to the Walt Disney Company. So in 2004, the Walt Disney Company formally took control of the Muppets. Now they didn't have to worry about licensing or doing other things. But they did have to worry about how they were going to use the Muppets. It became a very open-ended question for the Walt Disney Company. What are they going to do with them? They had Muppet Vision 3D open at what was now Disney's Hollywood Studios, and they decided, let's build a bigger courtyard. Let's make some more Muppet-themed things around. And they did some things in the area to really build on the concept of it. One of the things they did, it was kind of an ongoing joke with Gonzo, and became a joke in the movie they made later. Gonzo ran a toilet business, and so they called the bathrooms there Gonzo's Royal Flush. Kind of funny. They added more things into the courtyard and put Miss Piggy as the Statue of Liberty, and then went over and rethemed a pizza place that they had there. I'm pretty sure it was a Toy Story pizza place before this, and decided to call it Pizza Rizzo after Rizzo the Rat, which is also kind of funny. Rizzo the Rat running a pizza business? Hey. And continued to take the theming and build around it and put more things up on the walls and make it more interesting. But that was pretty much it. They had some meet and greets with the characters for a short period of time. They did some things that were kind of interactive and fun. They had a couple of little shows they did here and there, but nothing really much other than that. They had a short-lived dalliance where they created a new Muppet show that was on TV that was really not well received and kind of changed the theming of them a lot. And I know that several members of the troupe that did a lot of the puppeteering for Jim Henson complained about the fact that Disney didn't understand the spirit of the Muppets and wasn't using them properly, if you will. Flash forward a few more years. Jason Segel, an actor who had appeared in several movies and was in How I Met Your Mother, was a huge fan of the Muppets. He said he watched them growing up and really enjoyed the show. And he had created his own couple of Muppets that he enjoyed playing with. And I have heard tell that even as an adult, he liked to put on these Muppet shows where he would do things with these interactive characters. At some point, he started asking around, why aren't the Muppets doing more? I miss the Muppets. I like the Muppets. What's going on with them? So he reached out to the Jim Henson Company. And Brian Henson met with him and he goes, I'm sorry, we don't own the Muppets anymore. They belong to the Walt Disney Company. So Jason Segel reached out to the Walt Disney Company and suggested that they create a new Muppet movie and do something more with the Muppets. And he had a lot to do with the script that they wrote and the things that they came up with because he had this imaginative idea for how he and his brother, who was a Muppet, found out that the Muppets had fallen into a kind of a sad state of affairs. And he helps revive them through music and singing and dancing and all kinds of other things. And I have to say, the movie he created was very, very cute, a lot of fun, and I found it totally enjoyable. It was a nice way to kind of reintroduce the Muppets to a large degree. Maybe they weren't the Muppets you knew before, and maybe it wasn't what you expected the Muppets to be after so many years, but I thought it kind of worked in a strange way. And it was nice to see that Jason Segel had something to do with reviving the Muppets. And for a period of time, it looked like they might be coming back. And there were some other TV shows that they came up with and some other things that they did. And they kept coming up with things that they wanted to do with the Muppets. None of them went very far. Disney tried another Muppet movie a few years later, and it was met with a much more tepid reception. It just didn't have that same level of excitement around it. The storyline was a little weak, and it really didn't come together, and it was missing something. It was missing that heart, that moment when you think about it as being something really amazing. And so the Muppets fell to the back burner. You didn't hear much about them. There was nothing going on with them. There was Muppet Vision 3D was still going on, of course, but that was really it for the Walt Disney Company. They had nothing else to do with the Muppets. Sometime after the pandemic, the Walt Disney Company announced that they were going to close the Muppet Courtyard, Muppet Vision 3D, and retheme it to an entirely new land. But what would happen with the Muppets? They didn't say. The Muppets would just essentially disappear. And that's where we are today. Muppet Vision 3D is closed, the Muppet Courtyard is being torn down, but it's just kind of sad that the Muppets really are in a state of limbo right now. Disney owns them, but can't figure out what to do with them, and really has no plans for the future. They've made a couple of other TV shorts and other things, and maybe they'll continue to do some of those things. So here's to hoping that Disney does more with the Muppets in the future and brings them back in a big way, and an exciting way. It's unfortunate that Jim Henson wasn't here to give us sort of guidance on what he thought the Muppets should be. Disney has their own plans for things that they want to do, and it's all about intellectual property and doing things that they want. So I am interested to see what Disney winds up doing in the future with the Muppets, but for now at least, they're gone, but not forgotten.
You couldn't hit me with a cannon? Hey, everybody!
Everyone okay in here? We surrender! We surrender! What an explosion!
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to apologize for our slight technical difficulties, but I do wish to assure you that no one was hurt and this theater suffered only minor damage. So thank you very much for coming to see this demonstration of Muppet Vision technology, and enjoy the rest of your stay, and come see us again sometime.
I'll never recognize you now! Forward!
Well, what do you think? We have time to go to the bathroom before the next show? We can't, you old fool! We're bolted to the seats!
It is hard to believe, but it all began 30 years ago when a tall, bearded high schooler named Jim Henson took a piece of green cloth and wove a whole new world of artistry and entertainment.
I've heard the oft-repeated story about Kermit coming from your mother's spring coat. Is that true?
That is true, yes. The coat was slightly more of a turquoise green than Kermit is right now. And it was my mother's coat and a ping pong ball, you know, which I cut in half to make the eyes. Mm-hmm. It was a humble beginning. I love television, and I wanted to work in it, and I heard a television station there was looking for a puppeteer, so I made some puppets and got a job. But it was just in order to work on television that I got into puppets.
You mean 30 years ago they were looking for a weatherman? You'd be a weatherman now?
It would be now my 30th anniversary as a weatherman.
Of course, through the years, other stars have emerged from Kermit's shadow.
It's all terribly glamorous if one is a superstar like moi.
And so have some gifted puppeteers like Frank Oz, the man and voice behind Miss Piggy. Through Sesame Street, The Muppet Show, 4 feature films, and even the Muppet Babies, the Muppets have become a major industry. But Kermit remains the heart and soul of this empire, and so in effect does his alter ego, Jim Henson.
I remember one time I did The Tonight Show, and I had Kermit on, and Johnny was talking to me and Kermit. And I realized, halfway through, I said, it's interesting, and I said this to myself, you know, that Kermit was doing very well and I was being really boring. But it didn't really matter, you know, because he was working. You know.
Could you ever hand Kermit over to someone else?
Well, maybe when I get to be an old man.
Well, Kermit will get old.
I'll pass him on.
He's aged, what, about a day in the last 28 years?
That's the nice thing about puppets. They don't age at all.
Yeah.
It is sometimes hard to remember that the Muppets are just puppets. How much easier to believe that beneath the foam and cloth is a basic and very human philosophy, that people are basically good. And that's the message that Jim Henson wants to get across with his Muppets.
Are you having as good a time as you seem you are?
Yeah. I love doing what I do. I can't imagine anybody else, you know, having as much fun in their work as I do. I'm very fortunate to be doing the kind of thing that I enjoy doing more than anything else.
Well, 30 years from now, we'll meet again, and
Okay.
you'll clear up some more myths.
We'll do one after 50.
All right. And you'll still be doing Kermit.
I probably will.